You're listening to Primal Echoes, where ancient survival isn't history, it's engineering. Now, close your eyes for a second. You're standing on the Mongolian steppe. January. The temperature is minus 45 degrees Celsius. Wind is hitting your face at 90 kilometers per hour. There are no trees, no hills, no caves, no buildings. Nothing between you and the horizon in every direction, except frozen grass that stretches so far it disappears into white. You have a family of 5. You have livestock that need to move to fresh pasture every few months. And you have exactly one structure to keep everyone alive tonight. A circular tent made of wool felt and wooden poles. That's it. That tent weighs less than 250 kilograms fully packed. A family can assemble it in under 90 minutes. And inside, with nothing but a small fire burning dried animal dung, it holds around 15 degrees Celsius, while the air outside drops to minus 50. That structure is called the Ger, and it has kept Mongolian families alive through winters like this one for over 3,000 years. Every single winter, without fail. Now here's what makes the steppe different from anywhere else on Earth. It isn't just the cold, it's the combination. The steppe is flat, completely treeless across distances that span hundreds of kilometers. There are no natural windbreaks, nothing to slow the air down. Winter winds average 60 to 90 kilometers per hour, and gusts exceed 100. When you combine minus 40 degrees Celsius with 80 kilometer per hour wind, the effective temperature on exposed skin reaches minus 70 degrees Celsius. At that point, frostbite sets in within 2 minutes. Hypothermia kills within an hour. You cannot survive outside. You cannot build a fire that stays lit in that wind. And here is the part that makes everything harder. You cannot stay in one place. Mongol survival depended entirely on livestock. Sheep, goats, horses, yaks. Those animals needed fresh pasture year-round. Grass doesn't grow in winter, but it's preserved under snow, and animals dig through to reach it. When one area depletes, the herd moves, and families moved with them. 2 to 4 times per year at minimum, 10 times or more in difficult years. A permanent structure was not a solution. It was a death sentence. Fix yourself to one location, deplete the pasture, and your animals die. Your animals die, you die. So the shelter had to be completely disassembled, loaded onto horses or camels, carried across frozen steppe, and reassembled, fast enough that a family could do it ahead of a storm. It had to insulate well enough to hold warmth on minimal fuel. It had to survive wind that doesn't stop for months. And it had to weigh little enough for 3 horses to carry. Every single one of those requirements was non-negotiable. Remove any one of them, and the design fails. People die. And then there was fuel. Trees are rare on the open steppe. For most herding families, wood was inaccessible during winter. The primary fuel source was argol, dried animal dung from sheep, goats, horses, and yaks. Argol burns cooler than wood. It burns faster. You cannot rely on massive, roaring fires to brute force your way through a minus 50-degree night, which means the shelter itself had to do most of the work. The fire was just maintenance. The structure was the survival system. The solution didn't come from fighting the cold. It came from understanding something most modern engineers still get wrong. So what did they understand that modern engineers miss? Start with the shape. The Ger is a circle. Not because it looks elegant, not because of tradition, because on a flat, treeless steppe where wind comes from every direction and never stops, a circle is the only shape that doesn't fight back and win. Think about what happens when 90 km/h wind hits a square structure. It slams into a flat wall, stalls, compresses, and finds the weakest point. Every corner becomes a fracture line. Every flat face becomes a sail. The structure doesn't redirect the force. It absorbs it until something gives. Now think about what happens when that same wind hits a curve. It doesn't stall, it slides. The force moves around the perimeter without finding a point to push against. No corners to crack, no flat walls to catch. The wind arrives, and the Ger simply redirects it, the same way, regardless of which direction it comes from. On the steppe, where wind direction shifts constantly through the night, that wasn't a design preference. It was survival geometry. But the circle does something else that most people never consider. It gives you the maximum interior volume for the minimum exterior surface area. In practical terms, that means less felt needed to cover the same amount of living space. And on the steppe, every square centimeter of felt had a cost, in weight, in labor, in the animals needed to carry it. The Mongols didn't have geometry textbooks. They had centuries of frozen families. The circle won because families who built other shapes didn't survive to pass those shapes down. The frame itself was built from willow, birch, or pine, not because wood was easy to find, but because it was light and flexible. The walls were made from kana, expanding lattice sections that fold completely flat for transport and open into a diamond grid when erected. Each section was lashed together with leather cord. Not nailed, not bolted, leather. And that distinction matters more than it sounds. Rigid joints snap under stress. Leather-lashed joints breathe. When wind hammers the structure, the lattice flexes slightly, absorbs the force, redistributes it across the entire frame, and returns to shape. It moves with the wind, instead of resisting until something breaks. That is not primitive construction. That is a structural solution that modern engineers still use in earthquake-resistant architecture. And the Mongols figured it out 1,000 years earlier, not in a laboratory, but on a frozen steppe where failure meant death. Above the lattice walls, 81 to 88 thin roof poles called uni radiate outward and upward from a central compression ring at the crown. That ring is called the tonneau, a wooden wheel, usually 90 to 120 centimeters across, that holds every single roof pole in balanced tension simultaneously. The shallow dome created by this arrangement does two things. It sheds snow before the weight becomes dangerous, and it distributes the load across the entire circular wall instead of concentrating it on interior posts, which means no interior posts. The entire interior is open. Heat from the central stove circulates freely to every corner of the space. Most modern expedition tents, designed with aerospace materials, tested in wind tunnels, sold for thousands of dollars, collapse or fail structurally in sustained -40-degree conditions. The Ger does not, because modern gear was designed for performance under ideal conditions. The Ger was designed for survival under the worst conditions imaginable. The steppe didn't care about elegance. It only kept what worked. But the frame is just the skeleton. What actually kept families alive through 6-month winters was a material so simple, it looks like nothing. Until you understand what's inside it. The material is felt, not canvas, not animal hide, not woven fabric. Felt, and the difference is everything. To understand why, you need to understand how it's made, because the process is inseparable from what makes it work. Every summer, after shearing, the wool was cleaned and spread in thick layers across a large canvas sheet. Hot water was poured over it, sometimes mixed with fermented mare's milk, because the natural fats help the fibers bond. Then the canvas was rolled tight with the wool inside and tied to the back of a horse. And the horse walked, for hours. The constant motion, the pressure, the heat, the moisture, all of it caused the individual wool fibers to curl and lock around each other permanently. No weaving, no stitching, no machinery. The fibers tangled into a single continuous mat that could not be pulled apart. That is felt. And this knowledge, exactly how thick to spread the wool, how long to roll it, how hot the water needed to be, was held entirely by the women of each family, passed from mother to daughter. Not written down, not taught in any school, just demonstrated, practiced, and remembered. Because if you got it wrong, the felt was too thin. And thin felt in a Mongolian winter was a quiet death sentence. What makes felt extraordinary as an insulator is invisible. Wool fibers are naturally crimped and irregular. When they lock together under pressure, they don't compress into a solid mass. They create millions of microscopic air pockets throughout the material. And those air pockets trap air completely. Dead air. Air that cannot move, cannot circulate, cannot carry heat away. Dead air is one of the poorest conductors of heat that exists in nature. It is, in fact, the same principle used in modern insulation materials, in double-pane windows, in the walls of high-performance cold-weather gear. The Mongols didn't have materials science. They had wool, water, horses, and generations of women who understood exactly what those materials could do. A single layer of traditional Ger felt runs 3 to 5 centimeters thick. That's enough for moderate cold. Mongolian winter is not moderate, so families layered. One layer in summer for shade and rain, a second added in early autumn. By deep winter, 3 to 4 overlapping sheets covered the entire structure, creating insulation 10 to 15 centimeters thick in the most exposed sections. But the layering wasn't uniform, and that asymmetry was deliberate. The northern side of the Ger received the heaviest coverage because Mongolian winter wind comes consistently from the north. The southern side, where the door faced, was left thinner because that side caught what little winter sunlight existed during the short daylight hours. The Mongols didn't have heat loss diagrams or thermal imaging. They had frost patterns on the interior felt that told them, over generations, exactly where the cold entered fastest. The layering strategy was the answer to that information, refined across centuries of frozen nights. Over the felt went a final outer layer, a white canvas cover called the dure. It blocked wind from driving directly into the felt. It shed rain and snow before moisture could penetrate the wool, and in summer, its white surface reflected sunlight to keep the interior from overheating. But the critical property of the dure wasn't that it was waterproof. It was that it was breathable. 6 people sleeping, breathing, cooking inside an enclosed space produced significant moisture. If that moisture had nowhere to go, it would condense on the coldest surfaces, the felt near the walls, and freeze into ice layers inside the insulation. Ice conducts heat. Ice forming inside felt destroys its insulating properties from the inside out. A sealed shell would have killed the very system it was meant to protect. The breathable canvas let moisture escape while keeping wind and precipitation out. That balance, not too sealed, not too open, was engineered into the material choice itself. Now, inside this layered shell, the stove sat in the exact center of the floor. Not slightly left, not slightly right, the center, because heat radiates equally in all directions, and the distance from the stove to every section of felt wall had to be identical. If the stove sat off-center, one side of the Ger would freeze while the other stayed warm. Families sleeping near the cold wall wouldn't survive the winter. Center placement wasn't a cultural rule. It was a thermal equation. The stovepipe ran straight up through the tonneau opening at the crown. Straight, no bends. Because a straight vertical pipe creates maximum draft. Hot air rises fast, pulls fresh air in from below, and makes even low-quality argol burn hotter and more efficiently than it otherwise would. Along the way, that column of hot metal radiated warmth along its entire length before the heat escaped through the crown. The pipe itself became a secondary heat source, and the warm air it pushed upward spread across the domed ceiling, cooled slightly against the felt, and descended back down along the walls, a continuous convection loop, driven by nothing but physics, requiring no power, no mechanism, no maintenance, just a straight pipe and a centered stove. Fires couldn't burn all night. Fuel was too scarce for that. Before sleep, families banked the stove, buried the coals under ash to smolder slowly through the dark hours, releasing minimal heat across a long stretch of time. The felt held enough residual warmth that by morning, interior temperatures had dropped only to 5 or 10 degrees Celsius. Cold, but survivable under sheepskin blankets. And every morning, before anyone else moved, the woman of the household was already up. Not because tradition demanded it, because if no one rebuilt that fire before the coals died completely, the temperature inside the Ger would keep falling. And a family that didn't wake up warm enough to move quickly enough didn't always wake up at all. That was the reality behind the routine. Not ceremony, survival calculus, performed every single morning, for every winter of a person's life. The tonneau opening at the crown served one more function, ventilation, but it created a problem. Every gap that let smoke out also let heat escape. The solution was the urki, a felt flap attached to ropes that could be pulled partially or fully over the crown opening from outside. On the coldest, calmest days, the flap was drawn nearly closed, leaving just enough gap for smoke to exit. On windy days, it opened wider, because wind pressure differentials could force smoke back down into the Ger if the opening was too restricted. Someone had to go outside, assess the conditions, and adjust the ropes to the correct position. At minus 40 degrees Celsius, every time the wind shifted. Every day, for months. Modern sleeping bags rated to minus 30 degrees Celsius struggle to keep a single person alive through a night in these conditions. The Ger kept an entire family alive for an entire winter, on fuel that burns cooler than wood, with a fire that didn't run all night. Because it wasn't fighting the cold, it was outlasting it, storing heat in the felt, releasing it slowly, maintaining just enough warmth for survival, without burning through what little fuel existed. But here's what no blueprint can capture. The most important part of the jar wasn't built with wood or felt. It was built over generations. Go back to where we started. The Mongolian steppe, January, -45 degrees Celsius. Wind at 90 kilometers per hour. Nothing between you and the horizon in every direction. You're looking at the same scene, but now you understand what you're seeing. That circular shape isn't primitive. It's the optimal geometry for wind deflection. That felt isn't simple material. It's millions of trapped air pockets holding a 60-degree temperature difference between inside and out. That centered stove isn't tradition. It's a convection engine running on physics alone. That woman adjusting the crown flap in the dark isn't following ritual. She's managing the ventilation system that keeps her family breathing through the night. Nothing about this structure is accidental. Every element solved a problem that had no margin for error. It solved the problem the first time, and 3,000 years later, it still does. The most sophisticated survival technology ever built isn't sitting in a laboratory. It isn't patented. It isn't manufactured at scale. It's a structure that fits on 3 horses, and it outlasted every civilization that ever tried to build something better. That is not a romantic idea. That is an engineering result. Every ancient solution has an echo. This was one of them. This is Primal Echoes. Next episode, another frozen world. Different continent, different people, same impossible problem. The Viking Longhouse. How a seafaring civilization that conquered the North Atlantic survived winters that made the Mongolian steppe look forgiving. How they engineered warmth, community, and survival into a single structure, and what it cost them when they got it wrong. That one is coming next. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the right time.